you for joining us today. To save bandwidth for all of our attendees, we ask everyone to turn their cameras off and mute themselves during the presentation. I will be monitoring the chat so you can share any questions that you have with me there, and I will share them with Starla. And Mark Brofton is running tech for us today. Thank you, Mark. And this part is very important, so please listen carefully. Only individuals that attend the live webinar are eligible to receive a certificate. We do not automatically send all attendees a certificate. You must request a certificate after attending the live webinar. The email you received with the webinar Zoom link has this specific information. Attendance is taken during the live webinar, and we will check our attendance list to confirm your participation. Additionally, we need the name you registered with to issue the certificate. So if your Zoom name is different, please private message Mark to let him know. And for our land acknowledgement, TCINN is headquartered in Austin, and as such, I am on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Comanche, and Sona people. Our ongoing colonial presence on Indigenous lands compels us to take action to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through TCIN Network is one small step towards this effort. And I'll be dropping a few links with more information. May is Mental Health Month, and we have planned a special webinar for you today on mindfulness in nature with Starla Simmons. Starla is a clinical assistant professor and director of the Earl Maxwell Scholar Program at the University of Texas at Austin, Steve Hicks School of Social Work. Welcome, Starla. We are so excited to have you with us today. Please take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I see some familiar, well, not their faces, but I see their names. So of some people that I know on here. So that's always exciting. And some of you, I think, have maybe attended one of my talks on ecotherapy before. So it'll be a nice refresher. And that's always nice to have people come back. That means a lot to me. So thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me today. So I am going to just go ahead and get started. I am Starla Simmons. I'm a social worker and a clinical assistant professor at the Steve Hicks School of Social Work at UT. And I am just honored to be able to share my love for working with nature, working in nature, and really just continuing to uplift the relationship that we have to the natural world and how it is a beautiful way for healing. And so thank you for having me today. And now let me move some of my slides. Okay. So today's goals are really to understand and talk about mindfulness, but really under this umbrella of ecotherapy. To talk about we'll look at some of the research and learn about how it's beneficial for our health and well-being. I'll talk about some practices that I've used under the umbrella of ecotherapy and mindfulness, and also to acknowledge some of the traditional and cultural practices that connect us to nature that are really a lot of mindfulness and ecotherapy practices originate from. And always, I'm hoping to inspire folks to just deepen their connection and relationship with nature. And I feel like I know that I'm speaking to my people on this. So hopefully we'll be able to just all be on the same page. And I like to point out my pictures throughout this presentation. So when my children were way, way younger, but this is a big tree at Eastwoods Park in Austin, Texas, which was one of the sites of Juneteenth, original sites of Juneteenth, and I think it was like I can't remember the year, but you should check out that history. So I first want to begin just talking a little bit about my journey in ecotherapy and mindfulness, just so you kind of understand where I'm coming from. I think it's always important whenever we are doing any kind of presentation, I like to know where the speaker is coming from and kind of what their story is and what their connection is. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So I grew up in the country, and I have a grandmother. Both of my grandmothers are still alive. One of my grandmothers had a farm outside of St. Louis. And so I spent a lot of time running around barefoot. Oh, whenever I just talk about this, I just can go so quickly back to those memories of playing with my cousins and just having very much like unfiltered freedom in the outdoors. And so it really created this beautiful foundation of safety and comfort and just a feeling of liberation and connection in nature. And so I grew up with that as my base. I went to summer camp. I was a summer camp counselor one summer where it really changed the trajectory of my career. It's when I realized I wanted to be a social worker. And when I think about mindfulness, I wanted to note this book, Peace is Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh, because it was truly the text that really opened my eyes to help me discover what it felt like, what mindfulness felt like embodied. And it was just really transformational in how I walked through the world as a young Black professional living in a largely white area. I think I carried a lot of anxiety. I carried a lot of I think there's just a lot of walls to be able to try to excel within this world. And so it was really important and instrumental for me to figure out how to be in my body and how to be resilient in my breathing, be resilient in my presence as a Black social worker working in and around trauma. It's just been very important. And so with that foundation, I worked as a long time as a school social worker in Austin, Texas. And I think I didn't realize that I was practicing ecotherapy or, doing mindfulness practices. I think many years later, I was like, oh, I've been doing this for a long time because it felt so natural, but always have just incorporated a large amount of working with nature, taking kids and connecting them to plants and animals and clouds and the wind and all of the elements. Just kind of knowing internally that this was how we were meant to be as humans, connected, and also having it just be a really natural fit with the children that I worked with. And so as a social worker, I've always incorporated different practices, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, into my school social work. And then in 2016, I became a member of Outdoor Afro, and that was also hugely impactful on my career and just how I showed up. And it just helped me connect all of these dots around why I was so drawn to the outdoors and nature, but also at the same time, there was the stereotype and there was a block. And I didn't see very many people. Well, I did, but the idea of who loved nature was not someone who looked like me. It was not a Black person. And Outdoor Afro really changed that narrative. And it helped me to understand how beautiful and how ancestral of a practice that this relationship with nature is, and how it's really a part of culture, and it's a part of so many cultures. And it's this and that needs to be continually uplifted. And so that really has brought me to this intersection of the work that I've done with children, mostly children of color, working in communities of color in the Eastern Crescent in Austin, Texas, as a social worker with a very strong focus on social justice. And then all of these ecotherapy practices, they've all kind of combined into this beautiful, which I feel like life calling, which I can just bring it all together now, this practice. And so that's where I'm coming from today. And I am very curious and interested for people to put in the chat sort of where you are from, who is out there in the Zoom land. I'm such a personal connector. I've unfortunately gotten used to just talking to a screen, but I would love to say hello to people. So yeah, social workers tuning in from San Marcos. I just last weekend was in San Marcos, and we did a canoeing camping trip. And me and my son had our, what I like to call, redemption camping trip. People from city of Austin, excellent. Oh, yay, now all the things are coming in. Passes, free forest schools, mindfulness instructor, excellent. You can speak up, jump in. You probably have a lot more to add. Lots of departments of Austin ISD, people from Austin. Hi, Sandra. Okay. City of Austin. I'm really excited because I'm really hoping to get some social work interns with the city of Austin. So lots of really cool places. Environmental Defense Fund. Oh, okay. So anyways, I'm going to have my email up at the end, and I really hope to connect with several of you because I love to be in this world, and I'm excited to just keep moving this forward. And I should keep going so I can stay on time. El Ranchito. I love El Ranchito. Okay, I'm gonna stop looking at the chat now. But you all should say hello to each other. So as I was saying, I've just been on this mission to integrate and expand ecotherapy into social work practice. And, social workers, we are always talking about how to increase the mental health, the health and happiness and well-being of everyone, human beings, and particularly those who are living in the margins. And this is a picture of my class last year. They did this beautiful presentation on mindfulness, and they took the whole class outside, and it was just really, really beautiful to kind of see all the things that we've been talking about come to fruition on UT campus, which has this gorgeous creek. So we really took advantage of that. Okay. So another quick, just put in the chat, love for you to describe your relationship with nature. I think that this is something, I think we're all amongst our peers and fellow nature lovers, but something that I always ask people to do when I'm doing this presentation is to really start off grounding yourself with, what is your relationship with nature? How are you, is it reciprocal? Is it take? Is it give? Just to really think about that, how you're connected, how you're not connected, to just start there, taking a moment, thinking about your relationship with nature. And, oh, hi, Amanda. And this picture was taken at Mayfield Park and Preserve in Austin, which is another beautiful place that has the perfect trail for like young adults, especially in the summer. It's very, very beautiful. Someone says we are nature, which I wholeheartedly agree. Absolutely. So what is ecotherapy? Ecotherapy is a growing professional practice field of practice. Like I said, I would always make up these different activities to combine social emotional connection and have a lot of metaphors. Doing that when I was doing different like psycho-educational groups or different counseling groups. And I realized later, oh, I'm an ecotherapist. And there's a woman who I like to credit, Amy Sejanio, who really was the first person to, maybe some of you know Amy Sejanio, was one of the first persons to introduce in a clinical sense to me what ecotherapy was and offer trainings in Texas. And she really founded what is called the Texas Ecotherapy Collective, which is a group of mental health professionals who are interested and committed to integrating ecotherapy into their treatment practices. And so I got involved with that group and attended trainings, attended a mindfulness in nature group where I really started to learn like, oh, this is the clinical application of some of the things that I was just doing, doing out of the creativity and love of nature. But it's really exciting now because there is research that is showing the benefits of ecotherapy. So any healing or treatment approach that incorporates nature or this reciprocal relationship with nature can be considered ecotherapy. Personally, I look at ecotherapy and I think a lot about environmental justice and the relationship to not only how we are in relation with the earth, but also where and how the systemic disparities have been created, how we have, how communities of color have been disproportionately affected by pollution, hazardous, and just all the ways that we have pillaged through the earth. There's a spiritual element to it, and there is this psychological, biophilic element to ecotherapy, in that we are in a lot of ways reflection. The health of the earth is also the health of the people, right? And so clinical ecotherapy is really, there's a phrase that says it's like nature as your co-therapist. And so I have great stories of nature as my co-therapist. And I love it because it feels like one of the most natural, easy ways to help someone feel better. But there's also some blocks and barricades to that, but it's been one of the most natural ways that I've kind of incorporated working with kids and adults. So the ecotherapy umbrella, there's lots of things under the therapy umbrella, and I'm very curious to just have people put into the chat to the ways that they have interfaced or interacted or offer some of these activities through the work that you do, because many of you are working in outdoor experiences, but adventure and wilderness therapy. So some of those outdoor rec programs where you're really having like a big, camp, right? Camp is an ecotherapy experience in a lot of ways, where you are exposed and having these just exciting team building activities. And there may be even the program where there is a clinical therapist or a licensed counselor along with, that is helping to really put people into situations and helping them process. Equine or animal assisted therapy. I know there are lots of horse farms around, and a therapy dog. School has a therapy dog. You're doing ecotherapy. And so there's lots of people who I would say even consider their pet as their ecotherapy. I know during the pandemic, people were very much saved by their by their pet babies, right? And their plant babies, which brings us to horticultural therapy. Being able to work with the soil and the process of growing something, and the metaphor of how we connect with growing plants, herbs, food, that has a therapeutic and has proven research around the way that has increased sensory, depression, and kind of the general mental health. Aromatherapy, in many ways, we're using that. I think people think of essential oils when you think of aromatherapy, and that comes from natural plants. But even going outside on a rainy day, if you live somewhere, maybe not in the urban area, but you can smell people know what the grass is cut, right? You can have a sensory experience in the outdoors that takes you to a place. Smell is one of the strongest sensory experiences that we have that can bring up memories. And so aromatherapy can be a really powerful tool in helping to encourage and process through memories. Hydrotherapy, swimming. I'm so excited. It's getting hot out. I love cold water. I love Barton Springs. We know water is medicine, right? Water is life. And so when we think about hydrotherapy, not just being in the water, but being next to the water, I think that's why they have gardens that have, the waterfall sounds. These are things that are soothing and are a balm that are helping our nervous systems. Mindfulness in nature, which we will talk a little bit more about. Forest bathing, which is a very, I think a term that people are really using a lot. I'm looking at, oh, yes, looking at all these things. Forest bathing, which if you go in the Greenbelt in Austin, you can get some forest bathing there. But really for me, it's like just being immersed in tall trees, like being in the canopy somehow can feel like a forest. Bringing nature indoors. Not everybody wants to be outside. Today I was feeling so tired, and then I looked at the allergens and realized, okay, the cedar and mold is through the roof. This is why I'm feeling this way. And so it's really important for us to know that ecotherapy doesn't mean that you have to be out in the big wild. It doesn't even mean that you have to be at the park. You can be in your house and you can have your pet and your favorite plant and be holding a rock and have some rain sounds and be completely immersed in ecotherapy. And so we have to ensure that we are opening up this idea of nature to be wherever we are so that it's accessible, because we know that there's a lot of beautiful places that people don't have access to. And there's beautiful places that have been completely devastated by either natural or man-made issues. So we really have to have a big umbrella about looking at what ecotherapy means. And then herbalism and plant medicine, which is an ancient and very much ancestral way of staying connected and in relationship by the use of plants. And I am not a plant medicine practitioner, an herbalist, but I will be someday. I know what's going to happen someday. Do we have any herbalists? I'm sure we do. I want to shout out to all the herbalists, because it's a lot of knowledge and it's a long process to become an herbalist. Excellent. Yes, Terry, wonderful. Okay. So just to kind of go through some of the research, I'm a clinical professor. I'm not a researcher. I value research, but I like to just screenshot the research to show that what we know, what feels to be true is true. It has been studied, that 2 hours a week in nature has been associated with good health and well-being. Forest bathing has shown to lower the blood pressure. Oops. During the pandemic, there was studies showing that the more time you spend outdoors, especially during quarantine, you were less symptoms of depression and anxiety were experienced. I know for my family, a lot of these pictures that I took that are in this presentation today were during the pandemic, because we could go outside. And Outdoor Alpha had to say, nature never closes. Nature never closes. And I know a lot of people really kind of came back to nature during the pandemic, because that was what was accessible, and that really helped them to really just get through it, And I know that I think that's just something that was really important, right? It was thinking about how when the world stopped and everybody felt really stuck, we were still able to go outside. And I know so many people who all of a sudden are like plant experts, because they just got their feet in the ground. They had to slow down. It was like a world, it was like a world test with slowing down. And people were practicing mindfulness, but probably didn't realize they were practicing mindfulness. And people were doing ecotherapy, but didn't realize they were doing ecotherapy. And I saw somebody mention the park prescription program. And so I love this program. And Austin, I'm not exactly sure how some of the logistics are working, but Peace Park is part of the park prescription program. I know they worked really hard to kind of make that happen. And so all of these health benefits to kind of wrap up, and I'm not going to read through all of them, because I think it's things that you all know, that this time spent in natural places, we get vitamin D, our we have a natural ability for our brain to settle, so our cognitions improve. There's just all of these health benefits that have been studied and documented. And doctors know, doctors are behind it, which I think is cool. So connecting to nature it's an important component in the treatment of anxiety, depression, and adjusting to crisis. And this comes from an ecotherapy book called by Linda Bazell. And this is when I was saying, when I was working in schools and I'm working with children who are experiencing trauma, ADHD, all sorts of mental health issues, we would be inside trying to have these groups. We'd be talking at the kids, trying to process, and some of that worked. But when we would go outside, it was like things would click, bodies would settle, nervous systems were settled. So we were able to process a little bit more. And so we know that connecting with nature helps reduce the levels of stress. It enhances our state of mind, and it improves the parasympathetic nervous system functioning. And that nervous system functioning is what controls what they call the digest and rest, what helps us digest and rest. So really the ability to calm ourselves down is worked through the parasympathetic nervous system, and the natural elements that happen when we go outside as human beings who are, we're animals, when we're in nature, that automatically starts to improve. Nature heals. With all of that, nature heals. And it can be formal or informal groups, by yourself. We can do it in a lot of different ways. That's Palmetto State Park. I always, whenever I do this presentation, I feel like I'm also just a walking advertisement for Texas State Parks, because I've been to so many of them and they're all so lovely. So these are all pictures I've taken. So I'll talk a little bit more now about mindfulness. Mindfulness is the heart of Buddhist meditation. And I think it's been interesting because as we have a class on mindfulness at UT, and sometimes it's kind of like this love-hate. Like some people really lean into mindfulness and some people are really leaning away from mindfulness. And I think there's all sorts of reasons, and all reasons are valid. But mindfulness is really about having this awareness that comes from just paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally to experience things moment by moment. So it's really about just paying attention to what you're feeling, what's happening inside of you. And the word, I always get the words mixed up, but there's proprioception. Somebody in this audience probably can help me with this. Proprioception, which is like the feeling of like the sensory of like being felt. And so thinking of all the ways that we feel, all the ways that the body has different senses. I think there's actually like 21 senses, but we talk about 5. It's paying attention to that in the moment. So it comes from Eastern spiritual practices, but it's not necessarily religious. It's not meditation. I think sometimes people conflate mindfulness and meditation as being the same thing, but it's not. It can be, practicing mindfulness can induce a meditative state. You could start meditating and you could be practicing mindfulness to get you in part of that meditation. And one thing is, not always comfortable. And I feel like this is something that's really important to talk about, because I think mindfulness can sort of just be thrown out there as like, oh, just practice mindfulness. It's really easy. Just, feel what you're feeling in the moment. And it's really hard. I don't know how many of you in the audience are practicing mindfulness regularly, but it is a practice. You have to work at it. And sometimes if you're a person who already has underlying anxiety, or you have also trauma in your body, or you have, a million little people that you're taking care of, or you have any sort of underlying state, to practice mindfulness, you're not just going to slip into this sort of like Zen state. Every time we would have class, and so much so that I actually kind of changed this, I would start off with a mindful minute in my classes. And I already know that some of my students are just going to not like it. And I know there's students who are just like, they're really antsy. They just become more anxious during that mindfulness minute, because for whatever reasons, and there's a million reasons why, your nervous system is not settled. So if you already have a nervous system that is maybe in flight mode, and now you're being asked to draw more attention to those feelings of anxiety, it's not necessarily going to just like calm your heart down immediately. And so I think that is a really important thing to talk about when we talk about mindfulness, is that it takes a lot of practice, and it probably takes it might take someone working with a therapist and, doing some other work to address the underlying reasons that your nervous system is dysregulated. It might take other things than just to like focus. Everybody is able to practice mindfulness. It is an inherent human capacity to be able to kind of draw your attention to what you're feeling. And it can be a really helpful tool, but you have to really slow down and be curious. And that's what I always start with. If I'm leading mindfulness indoors or outdoors, I talk about how important it is to slow down. And we do not live in a world where we are slowing down. We live in a world where we are a week ahead, 2 days ahead, or maybe a week behind, 2 days behind, thinking about what happened in the past, thinking about what might happen in the future. And it's really difficult. And so it's important when you approach mindfulness to understand that it's not just like, you're just not going to just zen out so quickly. You might be like, my heart's beating faster. Okay, is that anxiety? Yes, that's anxiety. Okay, it's hot out here. I'm starting to sweat. I really don't like this. And just like going on and on and on. So, and that's normal. That's totally normal. The more you practice that, the more you just pay attention to it, the more you'll be you will have less of an emotional attachment to how you feel about that. And that's when you start to kind of be able to just like shut off the judgment and be in the moment. It takes a long time, but it has good results. So practicing mindfulness in nature, I think it helps to make this more natural transition away from judgment and into awareness. So I see a huge difference when I'm asking my class to practice 1 minute of mindfulness when we're inside of the Steve Hicks School of Social Work versus when we're outside and the sun is shining and we can feel the breeze on our skin and you can notice the temperature of your body. You become aware if you're thirsty or not. It's a lot easier to practice mindfulness in nature than I think it is when you're totally inside your inside head. And I really like the way that this particular author of this book, the Ecotherapy Manual for Mental Health, talks about these 4 processes taking through clients through. And that's the body awareness, mindfulness around breath, the sensory awareness, and then attention to the wider world. And so you kind of go through those cycle of things, and that kind of helps you regulate yourself and maybe practice less about the judgmental or the worry of like, why is my heart beating? Or I can't stop thinking about this. Why can't I be mindfulness? Why can't I practice mindfulness? But really to just be in your body. So mindfulness, many people probably have heard of this practice, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I feel like this is one of the most well-known mindfulness practices. I go into schools, and even my kids' school, and I see in their peace area the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 poster. 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, 1 thing you can taste. But even that, I was leading this mindfulness group with a group of UT students who were in an environmental justice class. And so they weren't really like all about mental health, and they weren't really all about mindfulness, but they were, all about the environment. And so I let them do this mindfulness exercise, and it was so funny because they were so awkward, and you just have to embrace the awkwardness. But still, I asked them to name 5 green things they could see because it was during the spring. And even still, many people were naming non-natural things. It was like, oh, that water bottle, that paint can, that person's backpack. And I'm thinking, okay, there's like 25 shades of green. We're at Barton Springs. And still, there sometimes is a block. And so that's why you just have to keep practicing to really kind of hone in, even if you're in the middle of a beautiful place. Sometimes we're not conditioned to see and experience nature in that way. Another important tool, I think, is really expanding your sensory vocabulary when it comes to mindfulness. Working with kids, working with adults, when we ask you to describe your sensations, sometimes it's really hard to think of words outside of what we already, it's like, oh, I feel hot, I feel dry, the wind feels tickly. But really, I think one of the best things I did to help facilitate this for kids and for adults was to be able to like get descriptive, because that helps us to connect with senses. And so sometimes with some of the kids groups I led, I would have this list of words in my pocket, and I would read them a word, and then we would go around and we would look around and find something that described one of the sensory words. So I'd say, okay, let's look for something that seems like it might be sort of metallic to the touch. And so they would go around, or maybe we'd find something that was really spiky. And so we would do these sensory, kind of like sensory scouting. That always worked really nice, just to help them build their vocabulary. That was always like a beginning thing I would do with kids. Some other simple practices are sit spots. You can Google sit spots and lots of information comes up, but it's really about finding a favorite spot in nature to sit, one that you're going to return to. And when you return to that spot, you observe and you notice the changes. You really start to notice what other organisms live there. You start to notice the differences in the seasons. Journal it. And it's really, I think about like even sitting in this chair right now, and I have the same view out of my window, and I will be in a meeting or I'll be working, but I can take these moments of mindfulness and be really intentional about it. And I'll look out my window and I know, oh, here are the chickadees. That means probably the titmouse birds are coming by. Oh, there's the woodpecker. And I just start to notice things that I'd never noticed. And I never sat in this spot until the pandemic. And so it's become my new sit spot. And I practice that mindfulness in my backyard. And I've seen like red-tailed hawks. I've seen so many things, and I'm, in the city. But having people, wherever you work, wherever you're facilitating this, going to the same spot and noticing the changes is really a powerful way to be practicing mindfulness. Cloud watching. I just can't underestimate cloud watching. It's just, especially during the spring when we have different storms. When I would take kids out on those cloudy days where the weather is not bright and sunny, but we would develop this beautiful appreciation for clouds and how they move. And we would imagine what it would feel like to be in the cloud and we would come back to some of that sensory language, and it would just get kids back into their bodies. Fox walk. Fox walk is an indigenous practice, and you can also Google this. There's lots of videos to learn how to fox walk, and this was always really fun with kids. But it's how to learn how to walk noiselessly through the woods, how to be as quiet as possible, how to put your foot so that you don't make any sounds, so that you really hear the sounds around you. And this was always really fun to do with kids. And you could, mimic any animal and practice that as a way to you're practicing mindfulness, because you're really paying attention to your body, what you're hearing, what you're not. So those are some simple practices to do. Okay, any questions? I got like 15 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the groups that I did. So I would do these ecotherapy groups, and I've done them with a variety of different types of kids. But one of the things was that no matter what the kids came with, what they were referred to me for, right? It would be either kids got referred for all sorts of reasons, but it was always the goal to help them to just practice self-regulation, to nurture this relationship with nature so that they can see nature and experience nature in a way that is not like, oh, we're just on the playground running around, or we're playing sports. Because a lot of kids, especially the kids that I was working with, kids who were not necessarily they're living in apartment complexes, and they're not living in these beautiful natural spaces or even nicely landscaped spaces. So it was really about appreciating and noticing what environment they did have, and practicing that mindfulness, and just being. We practiced being a lot, and I would talk to them about being, like, right now we are just going to be. And so we would go through the senses and just feel what things felt like. So what does it feel like to have the sun on your skin? And that was just a big one, because I think that everybody could just palpably feel that. They're like, oh, it feels warm. It feels like I'm warming my bones. It feels like I'm getting a hug. Or it feels like I'm burning, just depends on the weather. We did a lot of bug observations. That is a great way to practice mindfulness with kids. Follow a bug around and just watch it, and just narrate what is happening, and have the kids narrate what's happening. And when we would walk around in our schoolyard, which was not very nice and had lots of trash and broken glass, but it was still this practice. They would just be wandering in the field, and it didn't look like they were doing anything, but they were practicing mindfulness. We were totally relaxed and totally tuned in, and they would talk about how they were tuned in. I did some hikes with teens, and I would always start with a people bingo that had nature activities, so that I could kind of assess what kind of experiences some kids had, because some kids' experience of nature isn't like this. They're not outside because they are having a good time. They're outside because they are doing work, or maybe their parents worked. Maybe their parents are migrant farmers. Maybe, horticulture therapy to them is migrant farm working in the fields. Maybe sleeping on the ground is having not been housed. Possibly there was all of these things that we have to understand, that kids, families, adults don't all have the warm fuzzies when they think about being outside in nature. One of the things that happened a lot in the neighborhood that I worked in were there was dogs that would get loose. And so being afraid of just like walking on a trail and having dogs come up to you. These are just things that we had to consider a lot. But we would start with some silent hiking, not necessarily fox walking, but just a silent hike, asking them to walk down without talking. And it was really powerful, because some of the students that I worked with, they were scared. They were having to be quiet. They were having to listen to their own heartbeats. Their anxiety was going up, right? Mindfulness can't increase some anxiety if you're not disassociating from it. And so it was really important for us to stop, check in with our bodies, and really think about and process safety, process smells, just process. And a lot of really beautiful conversations came out of that. I would let them sort of spend some time alone in nature, which can feel kind of scary too, right? If you're not even used to being alone at all, to be, out of view from someone else, sitting down under some trees can kind of heighten a little bit of fear in certain ways. And so processing that, but then having students come back and be like, that felt really powerful. So one of the things is always just processing, asking questions. How did that feel? Where do you think that feeling came from? What helped you to calm down? What might you try next time? Just helping to process some of the dysregulation that can come up when we're really focusing a lot of attention on ourselves. Now, and if you have some kids who just like feel great and can just be like, this hike felt wonderful. I feel relaxed. I felt good. And that's really lovely too. But just knowing that might not be everyone's experience. There's lots of ecotherapy and mindfulness resources. This is just a picture of some of the books that I have, and I have a lot more, but I just remember when I started doing these kinds of talks and trainings, none of this really existed. And now there are loads and loads of resources out there. So take a look. I want to talk a little bit about and acknowledge some of the cultural healing practices that are indigenous and ancestral and come from this community's, original ways of survival. And I think it's so important when we talk about any kind of practice that is in relationship to the land, is in relationship to animals and nature, that we honor where this really all started. And I really started to, as I come into this field of westernized ecotherapy, knowing that a lot of this information, a lot of these practices have really come from indigenous ways of living. And so when we think about, I am not a practitioner of all of these cultural healing practices. I definitely have friends and family and know elders who engage in medicine and this sort of cultural medicine. And it is so important. And it is so at the root of all of these ecotherapy and mindfulness approaches, right? This is ancient knowledge. This isn't anything new. This is, matter of fact, these are the original ways that people have been in relationship with their senses and their bodies, have incorporated spirituality and healing. And what has really helped a lot of marginalized communities survive some pretty harmful things. And so I always, as a social justice professor, as a social worker, as a person who is aware of disparity and acknowledges all of the isms that happen to people, particularly marginalized people, particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color, we have to know that there are some reasons why people are not connected to nature. There are reasons why people are not connected to their bodies. And there are reasons that people are not connected to the community ancestral practices that were handed down. And we can look to all of that. We know the reasons why through colonization, through slavery, through historical traumas and racism and violence, that there are a lot of people who have been disconnected from their natural ability to practice mindfulness, to be in touch and be in relationship to clean water, clean space, the herbs and plants that are traditionally used for healing. And so it's really important as we engage in mindfulness, as we engage in ecotherapy, that we acknowledge where some of the barriers are, and we also honor those practices, those indigenous practices where a lot of our ecotherapy and mindfulness has come from, that we acknowledge that. And so I just encourage each of you to think about that. There's information out there, but to really think about who you're working with, what kind of practices we engage in, and how we're honoring the roots of them. And so I really look at ecotherapy and mindfulness as this way that we can be collectively healed, right? The way that we can connect with the earth to better connect with ourselves and to better connect with others. We talked about the way that we've just been disconnected. People are experiencing loneliness. People are experiencing toxic stress, dysregulated systems, which come from all sorts of things, cultural, historical trauma, all of the isms. They're all really connected. And the more connected we are to ourselves and to the earth, the more healing that we can all do. So it really is, to me, when I think about ecotherapy and mindfulness and all of these beautiful practices, it's really a way for us to heal ourselves and really everyone. And so I just like to talk about that. So a couple of practice reminders. In social work, we always say, start where the client is. If you are working with someone or you're wanting to engage in mindfulness or ecotherapy, but you don't believe in it, or you don't get it, or you're scared, or it's like, I don't want to go outside, you have to honor that. We can't just send people out to do something. And I mean, I think we probably have all had some experience where we have tried to implement some sort of practice or do something and people weren't ready. You have to be ready, right? You have to start where the client is. We have to be safe. And that means we have to practice emotional and physical safety. Asking someone to go into their innermost and really observe non-judgmentally what they're feeling inside can bring up trauma. It can bring up anxiety. And so we really have to have a relationship with people and kind of be able to hold space to be able to hold what comes up. I've seen that working with people who are working with kids. They want to create this really beautiful, safe space, but then you realize, oh, the behaviors are going wackadoodle because the kids are dysregulated because they're also holding on a lot of anxiety and trauma. And so if you're going to be doing some of these practices, you might also want to be connected to a therapist or connected to another mental health professional. Really embrace the awkwardness. I can't tell you how many times I have facilitated something and I've just felt like, ooh, they're uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable. Oh, and I just acknowledge it. I'm like, this feels weird. Everybody, you feel a little bit weird moving very slowly. You feel a little bit strange focusing in inward sometimes because that's not really what we're conditioned to do. But you just embrace that and then it gets easier and easier. Also, to just learn about the environmental and cultural history of the land you occupy. I think that, history, sometimes we just want to not think about it, but it's living through us, it's living through our bodies, it's living through our system every day. And so it's important to think about what's happened on that piece of land where you are practicing your mindfulness, where you are walking, who walked there before you, who took care of this land before you. And to honor those things and to honor what has happened, because all of that lives within the selves of all of this earth. I really do believe that. And also to discover and embrace your own ancestral traditions. I think that a lot of things around mindfulness and ecotherapy, we feel like, oh, we can't do certain things, but every human being is indigenous to some land somewhere. I mean, we are of this earth. We are all of this earth. And so I think it's really cool when people kind of think about their ancestors and where their people came from and what kind of practices and what connections they're historically and culturally they've had to that land. That's powerful. And to be able to pass that on to others is really powerful. So the more we can just connect, and it makes our practice more wholesome, it makes our practice more ethical, it makes our practice more humanistic. Is that what I want to say? And that's, well, that's not exactly what I want to say, but I think that is something that we are really excited about. And so also remembering that nature is resilient and that we are nature. And I always post this picture of these purple asters last because they bloom in the hottest time in Texas, where I'm starting to just be angry about how hot it is outside. And then somewhere I'll look over and see these gorgeous purple asters and remember, I can bounce back. They can bloom in this heat. I can too. And so, and that's it. And I have a couple minutes. Here's my email. This is me at Big Bend. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'm going on vacation next week. So if I don't get back to you for a couple weeks, it's that time. I'm moving slower, but please reach out to me. There's so many people in this chat that I feel like I would love to be connected to. So thank you so much for your time. There is only a couple minutes left, but if there's a burning question, I'm here.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please don't forget to complete our evaluation. I'm putting the link to that in the chat box.
Well, thank you for all the beautiful compliments.
And our next webinar is a health-focused one on May 10th, 2023. It'll be at 2 p.m. on how to talk to kids about climate change with Kate Carmichael. So make sure that you register for that. I think